Mistake with my wife. I, Beck Randolph, am married to Mitzi Randolph, née Elton, and at the time of writing this story had been married for 10 years. We were both 34 years old and had 2 children ages 5 and 7. Mitzi's physique is not particularly remarkable, although I find her attractive. A slightly large ass for being 5'5", tall and weighing 140 pounds, but since I like big butts, I consider that a positive rather than a negative. While to me she is pretty and I have always found her attractive, she is not the type of girl that the average guy would drool over. She usually cuts her dark hair short, but every once in a while she feels particularly adventurous and gets hair extensions and puts brown contact lenses in her blue eyes, which tend to change her appearance dramatically. We needed a little break from work and the kids we love, but they can be difficult and we needed a break. And since both pairs of grandparents are 20 minutes from our house, we decided to spend a 3-day weekend without the kids. The grandparents were willing to help by spending 2 days at our house with the kids, which included overlapping for about 12 hours. The overlap was not a problem as my parents got along very well with Mitzi's parents, and they did not compete for the attention of the grandchildren. On the internet, Mitzi found a themed weekend at a mountain lodge. It wasn't really a resort, but rather a very large house that the organizer of the theme weekend rented with a chef, a maid, and 3 college-aged guys, bellhops, and waiters. The theme was 1960s rock bands. The women had to dress as someone from the Pleasure Seekers, the Ronettes, the Ace of Cups, or Goldie and the Gingerbreads. Guys had to dress as someone from the Beach Boys, the Byrds, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, or Jefferson Airplane, or the woman could be Gracie Slick. It was recommended to bring instruments, a set of drums, and a sound system. However, the weekend was not limited to guest appearances in the style of the old rock bands. There was also pool, horseback riding, skeet shooting, dance lessons, and a host of other activities. Obviously, the dressing up was just to get people in the mood. Mitzi dressed up as Eileen Biddlingmeyer from the Pleasure Seekers, and I dressed up as Mike Love from the Beach Boys. Mitzi looked so great as Eileen that I wanted to take a picture of her in the car. When we got to the lodge, there was already a fun group of about 20 people there, all in costume. Mike Love was probably the most normal-looking member of the male rock bands, but most of the guys had long wigs, mustaches, and epithetic clothes. I carried a small surfboard with me as part of my costume. I was really proud of Mitzi. Although I didn't know anything about the Pleasure Seekers before this trip, I learned that they were all hot, wore distinctive short dresses and false eyelashes during performances, and with her eyelashes, hair extensions, contact lenses, and tight short dress, Mitzi Eileen was very good. By 11 p.m. Friday night, all 30 weekenders were there, and it was a fun group. Different people taking turns playing drums, some singing karaoke with the soundtracks of the bands they were supposedly in, others socializing and drinking and generally having fun. The party went on until early Saturday morning. Mitzi had a particularly rough day getting ready for her trip, so she laid down around 1 a.m. I drank more than I had since college, but was nowhere near intoxicated. However, I was aroused by several female rock performers between the ages of 25 and 50, most of whom looked really good. Finally, around 3 a.m., things started to wind down and everyone went to their rooms. Paul Cantor's, Jefferson Airplane, Double and Steve Katz's, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Wannabe were both drunk and passed out. Many others were moving slowly. Stupidly, in my opinion, instead of numbering the rooms, as would be prudent, they were all named after mountains. The owner of the lodge must have been a real weirdo, because I had never heard of most of the mountains used as room names. They weren't simple or well-known like Everest or Denali. I swear Mitzi said our room was something like Mana Peak, which of course I had never heard of, but seemed easy to remember. Since the bellhops took our bags directly to our rooms, neither Mitzi nor I were there until it was time to go to bed. I walked around the entire second floor without finding a name. Luckily, the second room I went into on the 3rd floor was Mark's Peak, which made me think I had just misheard. I peeked into the room and saw her distinctive short pleasure seeker dress hanging on the rack. I closed the door and tiptoed into the room. I needed a shower and shampoo, and in the shower stall was a bottle of Herbal Essence Rosehip shampoo, one of Mitzi's favorites, which I assumed she had brought from home. I took a quick shower with the shampoo and climbed into bed naked. It didn't surprise me that Mitzi was naked because, although she usually slept in a long t-shirt, she had promised me that we were going to have a lot of fun without the kids. Mitzi was lying with her back to me in the pitch darkness. I pressed up against her and she seemed to unconsciously react by pressing her ass against me. She smelled really good, also because of the scent of rosehip shampoo in her hair. I was a little embarrassed that her hair was longer than shoulder length until I remembered the extensions she'd gotten yesterday to look more like Eileen. I kissed Mitzi's shoulder, stroking the top of her arm as she lay on her left side. It had been a long time since Mitzi and I had made love outside our house. I couldn't remember when, though I knew the last time was before our 5-year-old was born, but I remembered how great it had been. This time brought back some great old memories. After a very long time, I finally relaxed. As I leaned over and kissed her neck and stroked her arms, my life flashed before my eyes as a high-pitched voice spoke. "Oh, Alan, that was so amazing, darling. After a vacation, will you do it again?" My name isn't Alan, it's Beck, and Mitzi has a squeaky voice, not a high voice. Suddenly, all those times I'd scoffed at stories of making love to someone else's wife by mistake, thinking it was their wife, popped into my brain. What the hell just happened? My mind seemed to spin endlessly. There was no way I was going to let the woman I had just slept with, whoever she was, realize it wasn't Alan. I continued to stroke her, eventually moving my hand to her right breast, trying to fool myself that it was just to get her to turn away from me. After kissing the mystery woman's neck some more and playing with her, she started moving towards me again. "Time to get to work on your concubine," she giggled sleepily, and then rolled over onto her stomach. I would never intentionally cheat on Mitzi, but I convinced myself that I had to perform again so I wouldn't be exposed, because I was sure she would accuse me of domiganship if she found out. So I made love more willingly than I could remember, which resulted in exhausting pleasures for both of us. After all that, I lay down next to her and stroked her lightly until I heard her start to snore. That was my cue to get the hell out. I quickly got dressed, opened the door just enough to slip outside, and then started looking for Peakman's, wondering why the owner was so damn stupid to call one room Peakman's and another very similarly named Peakmarks. However, as I was walking down the hallway, I heard someone stomping up the stairs. I hid in the janitor's closet and looked out. There was a drunken Paul Cantor wannabe stumbling around, scrutinizing the names of the rooms. When he saw Mark's peak, he entered not too quietly. I hoped it wasn't loud enough to wake the mystery woman, obviously his wife. Once the door to Mark's peak closed, I continued down the hallway, studying the names of the rooms. Peakman's room was the last one at the north end of the hallway. Mitzi's tight dress was hanging there when I entered. But I wasn't going to limit myself to just that. I looked around some more and found my signature suitcase in the corner. I showered again, with the same rosehip Herbal Essence shampoo in the shower stall as the first time. I found out later that it was in all the shower stalls. I snuck into bed, naked again, and found Mitzi in her bathing suit. They say the mind is the most powerful organ. That must have been true in my case, since I had never before had 3 pleasures in a 2-hour period of time. But I was so energized from making love to the mystery woman that I was snuggling up to Mitzi in just a couple minutes. Then, just as I had during my foray into Mark's Peak, I was soon making love to her. After an extremely satisfying pleasure, which Mitzi also clearly appreciated, I fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, Mitzi was in a great mood. She ranted about how much she enjoyed making love in the middle of the night, something we hadn't done in a long time. My mood was more relaxed, although I pretended to be cheerful, and so was Mitzi. I didn't know exactly how I felt or how I was supposed to feel about last night. By the time breakfast was over and everyone was doing other things, I decided to just savor the feeling of euphoria from my phenomenal lovemaking with the mystery woman and purge myself of any guilt. After breakfast, I did try to find out who the mystery woman was. Since people weren't in costumes during the day, everyone changed back into their clothes in the evening. I wasn't sure who the Paul Cantor wannabe was. The wife of the guy who looked most like him was at least 5 inches taller than Mitzi, with an even bigger ass, and probably the most beautiful woman in the house. I couldn't believe she was who I had mistaken for Mitzi. We had a great day outdoors, playing bridge with another couple, swimming, playing croquet, and more. When we changed into our rocker suits for dinner, I finally got confirmation of who the mystery woman I'd slept with was. She was an Arlene Quattro imitation from Pleasure Seekers, wearing the dress I'd seen hanging in Mark's Peak. It was a different color than Mitzi's dress and had a few other subtle differences, too subtle for a clueless guy like me. And the differences couldn't be seen in a dark room. So Arlene Quattro's double was a woman who was at least 5 inches taller than Mitzi, and the most beautiful woman at the resort. Alice Thompson and her husband, who looked like Paul Cantor, was named Alan Thompson. He was 30 years old, she 26. Since our women were dressed in the same style, Mitzi and I sat next to Alan and Alice at dinner and had a good time. Mitzi and Alice seemed to really hit it off. I was embarrassed by my reaction to Alice. There was a lot of drinking again that night after dinner. I tried to stay away from Alice for fear of being caught staring at her. At one point, after many of the guests had dispersed, I walked over to where Mitzi, Alice, and the 2 women were having a lively, albeit light-hearted discussion. I managed to stealthily get close enough to them to eavesdrop. I actually regretted eavesdropping. While something flattering was said, it was also scary to the point of creepiness. Although I can't remember the exact words, I'll never forget the gist of it. Alice said, "Last night, Alan made love to me twice in a way he had never made love to me in his life, and then completely insulted me by not remembering them the next morning. I know he was drunk, but my God, how can a guy not remember 2 great lovemaking sessions, especially considering I'm off birth control right now and in the most fertile phase of my cycle? We were planning on getting pregnant this weekend, and the dummy doesn't even remember doing it." Although Alice's words scared the hell out of me, they had another strange effect. Inspired by Alice, Saturday and Sunday nights, I made love to Mitzi when we first went to bed, and then again in the middle of the night. When we split up on Monday morning, there were smiles all around. Everyone had had a great time. I was satisfied, and Mitzi was literally glowing. However, at the same time, I was scared. It didn't help that when Alice hugged me tightly goodbye, I pulled up my pants so quickly and vigorously that it was a miracle my zipper didn't come undone. I was sweating when she obviously noticed my reaction and got a really weird expression on her face, but thankfully Mitzi intervened, giving her a big hug, and I shook Alan's hand and then got the hell out of there. That weekend turned out to be the best weekend of my life with Mitzi. After the weekend at the lodge, we were much more adventurous, much more passionate, and made love much more often. Sometimes I felt a little guilty when I slept with Mitzi, because my mind would go back to thoughts of making love to Alice, but I was able to handle them without much guilt. There were a lot of positives left over from the weekend at the lodge. Mitzi and I had friended Alice and Alan on Facebook and had been following her pregnancy and birth. I was very concerned when she gave birth to her little boy Colin almost exactly 9 months after the lodge weekend. As I continued to follow Alice, Alan, and their little son Colin, joined 2 years later by younger brother Mason, I became more and more concerned. At age 4, Colin looked just like I did at that age. At age 6, when Mason was 4, Colin looked nothing like Mason at all. I kept hoping that Alice and Alan never had a reason to have their children DNA tested. I don't really know the reason why, and Mitzi never told me beforehand, but at some point Alice asked Mitzi to post baby pictures of her and me on Facebook, and Mitzi agreed. It was about 6 months after Mitzi had posted our baby pictures on her Facebook page when she struck me with the words, "I have good news." "What, honey?" was my smiling reply. "Remember Alice and Alan Thompson from our weekends at the lodge, who we both subscribe to on Facebook? They are coming to our town in a week, and I invited them to stay with us for 2 nights. Since we moved, we have plenty of room. Mitzi and I have both been promoted at work, make good money, and recently bought a 6-bedroom house." "Wonderful, honey," I replied with my heart lodged in my throat and a sudden pain in my stomach. The weekend that Alice, Alan, Colin, and Mason spent at our house was the busiest weekend of my life for 3 reasons. 1. Alice was hotter than fireworks, even hotter than the weekend at the lodge, despite having given birth to 2 children in that time, with my body reacting accordingly. 2. I was afraid that Colin was my son. And worst of all, 3. I was afraid of being exposed as Colin's father. Not previously mentioned. My height is 6 feet 5 inches, a foot, 30 centimeters, taller than Mitzi, but only 6 inches, 15 taller than Alice. Alice and Alan are almost the same height, 5 feet 11 inches. Alan is perhaps half an inch taller. I have blonde hair and blue eyes. Alice has light brown hair and blue eyes. Alan has black hair and brown eyes. Colin is in the 99th percentile of height for his age, 7 years old at the time of their visit, and has blonde hair and blue eyes. Mason has black hair and brown eyes and is average height for his age. I thought I managed to be carefree for most of the weekend, and everything went fine for me and fine for everyone else, except for one thing. I don't know how she managed it, but at some point over the weekend, Alice talked me and her into going to the convenience store together to get ice and a few other things. There was no problem, by the way. However, before we got in the car on the way back, Alice suddenly pulled out of her purse a tampon and something nasty like what you see on crime scene investigation shows on TV. "I need something from you before we go back, Beck," Alice said, coming toward me with a devilish grin on her face, picking up the tampon. What's this?" I looked stupid. "You've seen forensics on TV, Beck. You know damn well what it is. I want a DNA sample, and I'm not taking no for an answer. Did you really think our lovemaking would be of no consequence?" I timidly handed her the sample. The return trip went smoothly, except for her statement. "If Colin turns out to be your son, I'm not going to tell anyone about it. I'll just need your medical records in case they have any bearing on his health in the future." "Isn't that right, Beck?" she asked with an even more devilish grin than when she'd shown me the tampon and vial. "What makes you think I could be his father? I think I just made myself look even stupider." "You've got to be kidding. Alan doesn't remember making love to me the first night at the lodge, your reaction to me, and Colin looks just like you. If you're his father, are you sending me medical records?" she growled. Okay, Alice," was my meek reply. 2 weeks later, Alice called my office. After a brief small talk in a sing-song, not angry voice, she said, "I'm going to need those medical records, Beck. Send them to me in a package marked confidential to my office at—" I did as she asked, wondering how screwed up my life would be if Alice ever needed to use them. At my office, 2 weeks after I sent my medical records, I received a FedEx envelope marked confidential. When I opened it, there were 3 very sharp 812x 11-inch color photographs. Each one had Elise very attractive on it. The episode of exchanging confidential envelopes, combined with my memories of sleeping with Elise, had 2 predictable effects on me. The first effect, I daydream about making love to Alice almost every day when I look at the pictures she sent me. The second predictable effect, I no longer scoff at stories about a guy who accidentally slept with someone else, someone he mistakenly thought was his wife. The end.